Hi everyone, this is Svetlana. In this video I will be showing how I created this card featuring layered chipboard. It's kind of hard to explain what I mean by this, and hopefully you will see from these photos that the floral cluster on this card is made as such a thick embellishment. It consists of several parts fitting together as puzzle pieces, and each piece has different height. To create this card, I will be using Altenew Vintage Flower stamp set and the set of matching dies, along with Altenew die inks and several tools that I will mention along the way. I created this embellishment by combining two techniques, layering the cut and lay and making a DIY chipboard. And now I will be starting with the first part, which is layering the cut and lay. I already pre-cut a panel from Nina Solar White cardstock. The size of it is slightly smaller than an A2 card, which is about 4 to 5¼ inches. And now you see me kind of planning out how I want the elements of my cluster to end up together. Once I'm happy with the result, I'm making light pencil marks tracing the dies. These marks will help me later with the placement of each die when I start decorating them. But before moving to decorating, there is one important detail that I need to mention. When you are creating a layer decot and lay, you want to start decorating with the die you want to have on top, or kind of in front of other elements. In this case, I want the right flower to be on top, so that's the first I'm going to decorate. And then you go through the other layers moving back from there. I created a rough sketch of the decathlon layer I'm going to create, and I put stickers on each element telling the order in which I'm going to decut them. So here I'm going to decut the right flower first, then the left flower that I want to be behind it, and finally I will be decutting leaves that kind of tucked behind both flowers. Now I'm placing the right flower die onto the panel, aligning it along the pencil marks I made before. I'm taping the die down to the panel using a post-it sticky tape, so it doesn't move when I run it through my decutting machine. And now I go ahead and cut it. The next element that I'm decutting is the left flower. I also placed it on the panel, aligned along the pencil marks, tap it down and run through the cutting machine. And finally, using the same method, I'm decutting leaves. So here how it would look if I did a regular layer decutting lay. Now I'm erasing these pencil marks that I made before, as I won't need them anymore. I have a whole bunch of different erasers in my craft room for different purposes, and when I want to treat with an eraser just a tiny area, I like using this adorable one from Tombow. Now I'm moving to the second part of this technique, and will be creating dimensions for the cluster. First, I need to make a bunch of die cuts using the same dies I used before. I will be stacking them up later, creating the virtual board. As I want all elements of the cluster to be different height, I will need different number of die cuts of each shape. I want the first flower to be the highest, so I will decut it 8 times. The left flower I want to be shorter, and I will need 5 decuts of it. And leaves I will only decut twice, as I want them to be almost flat, just a little bit raised above the panel. Here I brought back my sketch, and now I put here stickers telling how many die cuts I will make with each die. Of course, these numbers are not like set in stone. If you will be trying this technique, the number of the cuts in your case can be different. It will depend on how high you want to have each element and on the thickness of your cardstock. I want the dimension of the cluster to have color, so I'm decutting them from colored cardstock. A yellow one for flowers and green for leaves. By the way, here for flowers die cuts, I'm using some leftovers of yellow file folder that I had left from another project. Usually in my cards, I use better quality cardstock. But in cases like this, when I just need something to create dimension, I like utilizing leftovers like such. After I have all the cuts ready, I need to do some additional die cutting, in order then to fit together nicely as puzzle pieces. As a matter of fact, I will need to decut these areas where dies overlap. In the beginning, when I was cutting these shapes from the panel, I started the cutting from the top layer, moving back to the very bottom. Now I will go in reverse order. First I will be cutting this area where the bottom leaf and the left flower overlap. I will cut it out of the flower die cut, using the leaf die. Now, as I only have 2 die cuts for this leaf, the overlapping with the flower would happen only on 2 layers. Hence, I will need to die cut this area only from 2 flower die cuts. It may be hard to understand what I mean, and here I'm putting down some kind of formula. As I use this die to make 2 die cuts with this leaf, so with this die I will cut only from 2 flower die cuts. To do this, I'm placing the flower die cut in its negative space in the panel, and placing the die also in its negative space. Now I need something to secure them together, so nothing shifts when I transfer them to my die cutting machine. I will be using press and seal from Glad. It's actually a household product, but now it's widely used in the crafting world. And I'm sure you saw it used by other crafters. So I cut a piece on press and seal, and now pressing it to the die and die cut, and sealing them together. I'm checking the back side of the panel, making sure the die is positioned correctly, with its cutting part right next to the edges of the negative die cut. I'm taking this couple out of the panel. And you can see now that press and seal does a very good job holding die and die cut together. Now I just need to run them through my die cutting machine. Doing this technique, I always like to double check if I cut everything correctly and all pieces fit nicely. To do this, I'm placing the die cuts in their negative space in the panel and checking how they fit. Now I need to do the same for the second die cut of the left flower. If you don't have press and seal, you can use any other sticky product you usually use to secure a die to a cardstock. Okay, now I'm finished with the die cutting from the left flower. I will be moving to cutting out this intersection where the right flower and these leaves overlap. I will be die cutting from right flower die cut using leaves die. Again, as I made 2 die cuts with this die, I will be die cutting this area only from 2 die cuts of the right flower. And I'm doing this the same way I did before. Finally, I need to cut out this intersection where 2 flowers overlap. I will be die cutting from the right flower die cuts using left flower die. The math here is the same as before. I created 5 die cuts with this die, so overlapping would happen only on 5 layers. And therefore, I will die cut from 5 die cuts of the right flower. Here you want to start cutting out from those die cuts you already cut intersection with leaves before, as those will be the ones positioned in the bottom of the cluster dimensional part. As the cutting process is the same. I'm placing the right flower die cut in its negative space, then placing the left flower die in its negative space, securing them together, and will run through the cutting machine. The main principle of this traditional die cutting is always to cut out this area from the die cut that is on top, using the die of the element that is behind. Like leaves are positioned behind the flowers, and I used dies of these leaves to cut out this intersection area from flowers die cuts. And the same with these 2 flowers. As the left flower is positioned behind of the right flower, I use the left flower die to cut out from right flower die cut. And also on each die cutting step, I always checking that my die cuts fit together nicely and nothing shifted during die cutting. Okay, on this point I finally finished my die cutting. And by the way, to do all this die cutting, I only use like a couple pieces of press and seal, so it really goes a long way. And next I will be assembling the dimensional part of the cluster. I already cut and scored an A2 card base out of basil marshmallow chick cardstock. And now I'm generously applying a tape adhesive all over it, making sure to leave a 1/4 inch border not covered with adhesive, as my panel is a little bit smaller than the card base. Next, I'm placing the panel over and adhering it to the card base. On this point, I'm ready to start building up the cluster dimensional part. I will be adding a layer of all die cuts at a time, making my way up. First, I'm placing all die cuts in their negative space in the panel. For bottom layers, you want to take those die cuts that went through double die cutting, as that's where all elements overlap the most. Have adhesive applied on the card base, all these die cuts stick to it. For next layers, I'm using Tombow Mono Multi-Liquid Glue. And now, I just adhering a layer by layer, building up the dimension. And first I'm using die cuts that went through double die cutting. When I'm working with liquid adhesive, after applying it, I like to tap it on a piece of scratch paper to remove some adhesive excess so it doesn't go over the cut edges. In this case, I don't have to deal with messiness that liquid adhesive can create. Now I finish with the dimensional part of the floral cluster. Here I'm trying to show it from all sides so you can see all the layers of it. But without any stem part, it doesn't have much sense. And now I'm moving to the stamping part of my video and will stamp flowers and leaves on pieces I cut out from the panel at the beginning. They will be the top layer of my floral cluster. But here's the thing. The cuts of these elements are a little bit bigger than corresponding stamped images. And there is a white border or halo around. But in this case, I didn't want to have any border. I want the image of my cluster to be continuous, without any gaps. In order to achieve it, I will be skipping stamping the bottom layers, and will be inking up my die cuts instead. I'm inking these die cuts using inks that I would use if I stamp the bottom layer. So for leaves, I'm using Altenew Faired Leaf Dye Ink. I'm using a sponge dabber for inking. If you don't have a sponge dabber, you can use an ink applicator instead. But in cases like this, when I'm working with rather smaller shapes, I prefer using an ink dabber, as it's definitely more handy. Now I move to inking flower die cut, and here I'm using Altenew Buttercream Dye Ink. While inking, I like to hold already inked part with a piece of scratch paper. So I'm not touching the ink part and don't leave my fingerprints there. Now, when I have all my die cuts inked, I will go ahead and stamp second and third layers. But here's one problem. Without the bottom layer stamped, it's kind of hard to position the second layer exactly where it's supposed to be. And now I will be showing one trick how I resolve this issue. For stamping, I will be using Minimissy stamping tool. By the way, this video is part of Altenew and Masit Petunia collaboration, which I probably should have mentioned at the very beginning. Okay, first I cut out all shapes from a white panel. The cardstock of this panel doesn't matter. I use some cheaper one. And position of these negative die cuts doesn't matter as well. Also, I previously stamped a die cut of these images in regular way. I placed this panel in the misty base. And now placing the cuts, each in its corresponding negative space. In this way, I have kind of a guide where I should position the second layers of all my images. I'm placing stamps on them, aligning along the second stamp layers on these die cuts. I'm picking up the stamps with the misty lid, and now replacing the stamp die cuts with the one I inked before. As a result, I have all my die cuts positioned exactly where they should be to stamp on them with the stamps I have on lid. First I will be stamping flowers, using Altenew Mango Smoothie Dye Ink. And then I'm stamping the second layer of leaves, using Forest Glades Altenew Dye Ink. For third layers of these images, I already don't need these stamped die cuts as a guide, as I can align third layers along with already stamped second ones. But I'm still using this panel, where I have all these shapes cut out of, as kind of landing station for my die cuts. This way I can be sure that they're positioned exactly in the right spot. For stamping the third layer of flowers, I used Altenew Warm Sunshine Dye Ink. And for leaves, I'm using Altenew Evergreen. At this point, I finished stamping my flowers and leaves. Now all I need to do is to adhere all these die cuts on the dimensional part of the cluster. Here again I'm trying to show this embellishment from all angles. This technique is definitely not the simplest, but it's not so difficult as you can tell from the first sight. If you try it once, you will understand what you need to do on each step. And now I need to take a couple more steps to finish off this card. As this floral cluster is kind of heavy element, it's not only heavy as it has a lot of cardstock in it, but it's also heavy from the design point of view. In order not to overwhelm my card, for the rest of it I decided to go simple. I already stamped and cut a sentiment using a stamp from Altenew Label Love Set and dark chocolate dye ink. I want to adhere it onto the floral cluster with its right side on the right flower and the left side on the left flower. As these two flowers have different height, I will be adhering the right side of the sentiment flat onto the right flower, and for the left side I will be using adhesive form squares to adhere it to the left flower. Now, as the difference in height between these two flowers is not so big, the regular form squares would be too high for it. Instead, I will be using thin ones. I believe thin form squares may be twice shorter than regular ones. Here I'm trying to show you the difference between a regular and thin form square. I don't use thin squares very often, but I like having them on my stuff for cases like this. When I want to raise something just a little bit, I added a couple of thin form squares to the left side of the sentiment. And now I'm applying a little adhesive to the right side of it. Here you can see that the back side of my sentiment is actually another sentiment that I failed to stamp well. Luckily, a cardstock has two sides, so you can always turn it over and start fresh. I want my sentiment to be as straight as possible, and by no means I can trust my eyes, so I'm using Multium Holes ruler as a guide. To finish off my card, I'm adding several clear droplets. Recently, I'm going through these clear droplets like crazy, and probably I will need to stock up on them soon. To adhere them, I'm using Ranger Multi-Medium in matte finish. I think it's the best adhesive when it comes to adhering something small and isn't made of paper. And it dries clear, so you won't see it through clear droplets. So now my card is completely ready. This video turned out to be on the longer side, but I just wanted to explain this technique as detailed as possible. This technique definitely takes some time, and it's not something that you would mass produce. But I think all efforts are totally worth it, as in the result, you will get an interesting and quite unique embellishment. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them in comments below, and I will be glad to answer them. Thank you for watching. Bye.